tracing one's roots can by itself be a political act. You all must have heard of Rishi Sunak, who could possibly become the Prime Minister of Britain in September. And that led Arup and me to ask that, this whole wah-wah that happens, Indian origin ka koi bahut top post pe pahunch gaya, what does it mean for us? And we have enough examples in the past, and we'll bring those examples to you now, of all these Indian origin politicians who keep a distance from their Indian identity most of the time. Only when it suits them do they bring up the immigrant status or the fact that they've come up the hard way, they've been successful, archetype of the immigrant who went into a foreign land and made it. Aren't there countless examples of this?
There are countless examples, and one of the main points I want to make is, before we get into certain specifics and names, that, और ये मैं हाथ जोड़ करके बोलना चाहता हूँ, that Indians have this strange system within them that they feel that anybody who's of Indian origin outside, they belong to us. They belong to no one. They belong to themselves, number one. Number two, if they are an American citizen or a British citizen, they would always want to be known as that. So many of them even resent talking about their Indian identity. But strangely enough, when someone like that gets elected into a top position, then there is these massive celebrations here. Indians go berserk. Is it the...
लेकिन जब cricket match होता है, then of course all of them root for India. Is that right?
That could be the case, but when someone becomes powerful or in a position of dominance or in a position to rule, be a diplomat or a prime minister or somebody very influential in the cabinet, then the dynamics of the game changes completely. So for Indians to believe in India that, oh, they are one of ours, so let's celebrate them. If they come here, then again we go berserk with that Tika ceremony and all of that. Believe me, it leaves them cold, stone cold. They hate it. And I'm saying this, 9 out of 10, it happens. Maybe there could be a solitary exception somewhere. They absolutely detest that.
There are 2 or 3 different aspects to this entire thing. One, we'll talk about their constraints as to why they do what they do. Before we get into that, one of the things that we should talk about is that there are these 3 or 4 countries, Canada, UK, 2 countries that I can talk of immediately, where the one thing you need to appreciate is that Indians did become part of the political mainstream. If you remember, when we went to the US, this was right after 9/11, so this would be around 2003 or so, and we did a show with some doctors in New Jersey. And one of the main grouses at that point was that the first generation was so busy eking out a living that they never got around to being part of the political mainstream. Now, if you see Canada, where Justin Trudeau is called Justin Singh Trudeau, so it's come to that. At least we are now part of the political mainstream. Is that something worth appreciating in any case?
I don't think so at all.
Okay.
I just don't think, I don't agree with that line of thinking at all. Whether it is Canada or whether it is the US, first of all, you have to see the diaspora numbers, how influential they are. Suppose someone gets, and there's a reason behind it. So suppose someone who's an Indian who goes there, born, brought up there, or just migrates and becomes influential, makes a lot of money. So the first desire is to acquire the status of that country, to become a citizen. Once they become that, they hate being called Indian American. I mean, let's talk about Bobby Jindal, the American politician.
Louisiana governor, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was Louisiana governor. Piyush Jindal was his original name. Later he becomes Bobby Jindal. He hated being called Indian American. It's like, as a funny note, the great actor Morgan Freeman was recently referred to as African American. So he said, I just can't understand. I've been an American all my life.
Yeah.
Well, the part I'm asking him with the accent, did he say, we will name him Bobby? No.
Why should I be
Yeah,
called...
but it's not the same thing as Bobby Jindal saying that he's got a tan. So Morgan Freeman is saying it from a different point of view, that his identity is American. And then, of course, you have the Kamala Harris's, who was called the first black vice president, and she's gone on record, by the way, as saying, I'm black and I'm proud of being black. I was born black, I will die black. But at the same time, in 2010, when New York Times had to kind of define her, she was the Attorney General of California, so she was known as the daughter of a black economist and an Indian biologist. I come back to the point that most of the times they distance themselves from them being their Indian identity. I mean, Kamala Harris shooting a video with Mindy Kaling making some idlis or something like that. Is that all that Indian identity is about?
I don't want to suffer the consequences of our future president not liking my Indian food.
Can I just tell you something?
Yeah.
I've never made dosas.
So while we are talking about Kamala Harris, who is the U.S. Vice President now, during the campaign, do remember that both Mike Pence, then the U.S. Vice President, as well as Donald Trump, used to mock her first name. They used to laugh and say, Kamala, Kamala, what the hell is that? Is that a name? So it's something as ridiculous as that. Then her backstory came out that her mother was a Tamilian, the father disappeared, and there was no contact. So where their backstory is concerned, I have always seen that they try and airbrush the past, number one. Number two, there is a certain dilemma that you don't want to be known as an Indian American. You want to be known as an American, as a true blue American. Now, is that possible? Yes, it is. But at the same time, they have to fight for acceptance. That entire generation has to fight for acceptance. Maybe it's hardest for the point you were making earlier. It's hardest for the first generation. For the second generation, it becomes easier. But if you're a politician...
I'm going to make another controversial point here. We've traveled enough to America, UK and Canada. I've spent a lot of time in Canada. I think also what happens is they just don't identify with India. We try and say, I remember when Kamala Harris was declared the vice president, and so her aunt is a doctor who has some connection to Chandigarh, and everyone on the school group, etc., went on, oh, how they had, some trying to find a vague connection. But let's be a bit fair to them. Since they're born and brought up there, they would probably be visiting India once in 10 years or once in 6 years, that also seeing India through a very different lens than what India is all about. They just don't relate to us. They just don't relate to the country, they don't relate to the culture, they don't relate to the ethos.
So my point is, it is not their fault, it is our fault.
Yeah.
It is the fault of the Indians here who foolishly believe that they are ours. They are not ours. They have nothing to do with India. And if the larger danger also is, which is rather a political discussion, that as and when, particularly in the countries like US, UK, Canada, if they are in positions of power and influence, the Indian diplomats and officials will tell you that they have a far tougher time dealing with them. Why? Because they have to cater to their own diaspora there. Then they have to basically also take care of the interests of the white community, and it's not so simple. Then there is a clash where the immigration laws are concerned, and similarly human rights. So there are a lot of contentious
let's
points.
not forget one very important thing. I'm talking only of the US here. Indian Americans as a voter base don't count. They're barely 1 or 2%. They're not going to move the needle. So even Harmeet Dhillon, I remember from the Republican National Committee, she said, my identity has nothing to do with my position on most issues, which is taxes, health and education. But she also goes on to say that there aren't enough Indian Americans in the United States to sway an election in either direction. So why pander to that electorate? If you were a politician, you would also not try and highlight or showcase your Indian identity if it really wasn't going to get you votes. That's fair, isn't it?
That's fair, but there's an element of hypocrisy also involved, or I would say political opportunism. Let's take the case of Nikki Haley.
Oh, yeah.
Former governor of South Carolina, U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, was born Nimrat Randhawa, and her nickname was Nikki. So, which is
a very common Punjabi nickname.
Absolutely. So Nikki then becomes Nikki Haley, and Nikki Haley even despises being called or being referred to as an Indian American. So they have a massive problem with it. The very interesting point is that she's has not been very comfortable talking about a Sikh background. She converted to Christianity, which is a personal decision, and
But she hides it.
But she hides it. She's uncomfortable, and she even listed her race as white on a 2001 voter registration
Yes, but at
card.
the Republican National Convention, when it suited her and someone picked up the issue of the fact that her parents did face racism, so she says, oh yes they did, I admit it, but to me it hasn't made any impact, and she kind of glossed over it. So when it suits them, then of course, and Nikki Haley is again a prime example of this on-off relationship with the Indian identity.
And this on-off relationship keeps getting played among different politicians, like we spoke about Bobby Jindal earlier, who was absolutely virulent and hated the fact that he was associated in any which way with India. And these are the type of politicians, when they get into influential positions, they create more problems for the Indian diplomats here, because they encounter a lot of problems because there are certain contradiction in terms, there is politics involved, there are some anti-India statements being made, which is a much bigger problem than having a regular, for example, in the US, a regular white politician.
And let's come back to the point that we were making, that the Indian American lobby, the Indian American voter base counts for nothing. It does not move the needle. So for them to pander to that or to highlight that just does not suit them. It's very easy for them to say, oh, it does not impact my identity. I only talk about issues like taxes and health and education. But the fact is that you don't need that voter base. Having said that, coming back to the point that you made, when Kamala Harris's name was announced, then all the Indian Americans there, all that dhol beating and all of that started, and lobbying for her and collecting money, all of that happened. But she's still African American. She's still South Asian. She's not Indian, right? She's still not considered Indian.
No, it should just be left at one simple point, which is that she is an American.
Yeah.
Let it be. I mean, whether she's an African American, whether she's an Indian American, and the huge desire to claim someone there as ours is the biggest stupidity I've
Why
seen.
do we do it?
I think it makes us feel good, and of course, I don't feel
As if
like
we
that.
as if we count on the global stage, as if we are relevant.
Yeah. The Indians feel that when it comes, I mean, we are a developing nation, and here's is a front-ranking nation, and someone who is the U.S. Vice President, who's known by the name of Kamala Harris. So it's a great achievement also for India. We contributed in some way or the other. I think we are way off the mark. We should just let it be because there is no further debate on it.
I want to talk a little bit about Canada. Over the last 13-14 years, I've spent a little bit of time in Toronto and Vancouver. And while it needs to be appreciated that Indians are about 4% of the Canadian population, but they do count now, and they are part of the cabinet. They're part of the entire process. You had Jagmeet Singh from NDP. Then, if you remember, that Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan, it became a very big deal that there is a turbaned man who's heading defense, etc., etc. But there are a couple of things that, and you've even had now Sikh versus Sikh pitted in certain pockets of Toronto and Vancouver. But the point is, they're a world of their own. They also don't assimilate, and they really look down upon India in the sense, oh, we in Canada do things like this, Indians don't do this, Indians don't do that, criticizing Indians all the time. Whereas we take a lot of pride in the fact that, oh, we've got a Sardar there who's a defense minister, or we've got we've actually got a lot of MPs, and they have a political voice, is what we try to say in Canada. Or I'm going to move on and try and end this on, you had very definite point of view on what these guys or these politicians of Indian origin should be doing, or what they should be conveying. What is that?
What they should be conveying basically is that they represent the country they belong to. If someone becomes, for example, if Rishi Sunak becomes the new head of UK, replaces Boris Johnson, then India shouldn't expect any dramatic miracles from Rishi Sunak. Yes, he's married to Akshata Murthy, who is the daughter of Narayan Murthy, co-founder of Infosys. So there are many controversies also associated with her and with them. So maybe there's not enough time to get into it. But
also not be another Priti Patel, where you have your parents came in from Uganda and you are opposing immigration.
Yes, that the entire Rwanda immigration plan, which became so controversial. In simple terms, what did it mean? It meant that UK was saying that all these immigrants who land up there should be packed up in a plane and sent to Rwanda and dumped there. So Priti Patel, who's an influential politician in the UK, backed that plan. So whether it is immigration, whether it is tightening the borders, they all sound very dramatically like Donald Trump to me. There are hardly any traces of Joe Biden there. So it's that the Republicans versus Democrat game which is being played on. They are brutally right-wing also. So these are facts.
And
this
again,
is reality.
pandering to some voter base.
Yeah.
Whether she believes in it or not, whether it is right or not, doesn't really matter. Whether it is unfavorable to India or not, that doesn't matter. What matters is that they win.